A few years ago, I served on the task force on the study of marriage for the Episcopal Church. Our denomination had just passed marriage equality for LGBTQ couples, the same week that civil marriage equality became the law in all 50 states. And the task force's mandate was to monitor the impact of marriage equality in the church and to report on contemporary trends and norms in marriage. There were 15 of us on the task force, a mixture of laypersons, priests, bishops, and deacons. And when we met for the first time, the chair said wisely that since marriage was such a deeply emotional and personal topic, we should begin our work by sharing our own experience of marriage so that we would all know where everyone else was coming from. We listened to stories of healthy, joyous marriages that were going strong after years, even decades, and stories of marriages made impossible by alcoholism or emotional abuse, where divorce was the only path to healing. Stories of marriages that ended amicably when one spouse came out, and stories of contentment as a single person who had never been married and didn't really want to be. There were stories of marriages between spouses of opposite genders, and stories of marriages between spouses of the same gender. There were other stories not present in the room. Stories of longing to be married but never finding the right person. Stories of divorces that were devastating because they were unwanted. The task force listened to each other's stories for hours, well after night had fallen, long after it had become clear that marriage is a complex topic, and we need all the nuance and sensitivity we can muster when we talk about it. That's a very Episcopalian approach. And it's countercultural in the era of Twitter. Our public discourse is dominated by sound bites, one-liners, the 280 characters of a tweet. But the Episcopal approach embraces complexity and nuance. We acknowledge that human beings, our world, the Christian faith, God, God's self cannot be summed up in a few words. And if that makes our doctrine messy and sometimes vague, so be it. When we let our answers be complex, we honor God who created the world with infinite variety. We do justice to the rich and contradictory witness of the Bible. And we do less harm to good, faithful people who are struggling to muddle through this lives with integrity. So we embrace nuance and complexity when we discuss the question of Christian marriage. And that question, any question about relationships, is really asking, what is God's design for humankind? God's design for us becomes apparent right at the beginning, at creation. That's the point of these creation stories, not to give a scientific account, but to explain what creation means. God has created all that is, and God sees that it is all very good in that deeply holy and affirming way. Only one thing is not good. The human being God has made is alone. This human needs a partner. So God creates more animals and birds and brings them to the human being to find them a partner. I picture this as God rummaging through a zoo, holding up one animal after another. How about a manatee? No? Okay. A stick insect? No? A goldfinch? It's got pretty feathers and a beautiful song. But none of them is right. The human being is still alone. So God creates a second human being, so similar to the first one that it's as if they were made out of the same stuff. And the human being says, yes, this is my partner. This is the one who eases my loneliness. The simple interpretation of this story is that it commands heterosexual marriage. But when we let the story be complex, we notice that the Hebrew word Adam, source of the name Adam, can mean a man or it can mean humankind in general, or it can mean a person of an unspecified gender. Maybe the story is about a man and a woman. Maybe it's about two people. Whatever their gender, it seems that they are not married. There's no wedding in this story. The creation story does tell us that God's design for humankind is relationship. It is not good for us to be alone. We need companions, literally people to share bread with. They may be spouses or friends or the family we were born into or the family we have created. God designed us for relationship. Jesus harks back to this when he is tested with a question about divorce. Jesus, as a faithful Jew, knew the Jewish Bible well. He knew that God's design in creation is for companionship. He also knew the law of Moses backward and forward. He knew that the law was given for the protection and flourishing of self and others. To Jesus, marriage fulfills both God's design and the intention of the law. Marriage provides companionship. And in Jesus' time, marriage protected children and women who needed the economic security of a father and husband. Jesus takes marriage so seriously that he appears to prohibit divorce altogether. God joins a couple in marriage, and human beings cannot separate what God has joined. And Jesus expands the definition of adultery. In the law of Moses, a man who commits adultery sins against his mistress's husband. The wife of an unfaithful husband doesn't get a mention. But Jesus says that wives matter. A man who commits adultery sins against his own wife. This is a strict understanding of marriage as lifelong and faithful, no matter what. Yet when we let the story be complex, we notice that this is not the only thing the New Testament has to say about marriage. What we've heard is the Gospel of Mark's account of Jesus' teaching about marriage. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus permits divorce on the grounds of infidelity. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus appears to object to remarriage, not to divorce itself. In the first letter to the Corinthians, the Apostle Paul allows a married couple to separate, not divorce. But Paul is not keen on marriage at all. He believes this world is rapidly passing away, and it is better to remain single and focus on Jesus' imminent return than get distracted with a spouse. The witness of the Bible is complex. It is made up of many voices that don't always agree with each other. To add to that, our understanding of marriage has changed a lot since biblical times. In Jesus' world, marriage was essentially an economic partnership. Husband and wife worked together to support their household. A married person hoped to be friends with their spouse, not to be in love with them. Romantic love was considered dangerous to marriage because romantic love can end. Women passed from the control of their father to the control of their husband. Women generally couldn't own property on their own, and men had all the power. A marital home was not always a physically safe place. First century people thought it was acceptable, even expected, for husbands to hit their wives and have sex with them without their consent. Lifespans were much shorter, so marriages were much shorter. It was rare for a couple to reach their 50th anniversary. And of course, marriage was presumed to be heterosexual. Compare that to 21st century America. We expect marriage to fulfill us personally. We expect to be madly in love with our spouses. And because we live longer, we're supposed to remain in love for 50, 60, 70 years. We presume that both spouses are equal partners with equal power in the relationship. We consider domestic violence to be both a crime and grounds for divorce. And we believe marriage should be between two people of any gender. First century people would be baffled by 21st century marriage. And probably most of us would vehemently resist a first-century marriage. When the story is complex and contradictory, Episcopalians look for what does not change across the whole story. We look to the values and principles that we find throughout the Bible, and we base our theology on them. And what has not changed is God's design for humankind and God's intention in giving the law. God designed us for companionship, and God intends for the protection and flourishing of self and others. It is not good for human beings to be alone. We know that better than ever after the last year and a half. We need someone to share bread with. Some people will find companionship in marriage. Some will find it with friends, or children and grandchildren, or parents and siblings, or nieces and nephews. The ideal marriage is lifelong and faithful, yet we human beings are fallible. We make vows with the best of intentions, and sometimes, no matter how hard we try, we are not able to keep our promises. When a marriage does not fulfill God's design of companionship and intention of protection and flourishing, sometimes divorce becomes necessary. I left my first marriage because my former spouse was emotionally abusive. I was slowly dying in that marriage, and the only way I could live was to leave. Divorce for me was God's gift of new life. I've never regretted it for a second. When divorce is necessary, the protection and flourishing of the most vulnerable among us, children, has to be paramount. Parents can't completely shield their children from pain and suffering. Being human entails being hurt sometimes. Divorcing parents can love their children no matter what and do their utmost to put the kids first. When the task force on the study of marriage had completed its work, we had not found any simple answer to the question of marriage. You're shocked, I know. The task force was meant to include a variety of opinions, and there was a lot we still disagreed on after 3 years. But one principle that we all kept returning to is that God's powerful, abiding love for us does not depend on marital status. Society often makes people feel less when they don't have a partner, as though they're somehow letting the team down. But as Jesuit priest Greg Boyle says, God is too busy loving us to have any time left for disappointment. God loves you whether you are single or married or separated or divorced or widowed. It is because God loves us that God gave us each other, that our basic need for companionship might be fulfilled, whether in marriages, friendships, or family relationships. And whoever our companions are, whichever box we check when we're asked about marital status, we thank God for the gift of each other.